Judges, the king is coming. This episode, the golden key to prosperity. Well, welcome back to the Judges. We are in the book of Deuteronomy because we are laying down the law, so to speak, that the judges are going to be judging compliance too. And so to understand what happens during the judges period and how it is a prophetic shadow picture to this day and time, as it was in the day of the judges, everyone did that which was right in their own eyes because there was no king in Israel. But yet there was a king in Israel. The king from heaven was the king of Israel, but yet people did not want to live in compliance with that, and when they got off track, then destruction came upon them. Bondage came upon them. Slavery came upon them. And they did not live with the prosperity that the Almighty had intended when he welcomed us into the promised land by the hand of the conquering angel. We are in the book of Deuteronomy. We are in chapter 21 at this time, and we just got through dealing with the stoning of a terminally reprobate son. And then the very next issue that we get into as we continue on with these individual statements, these individual laws that Moses is laying out. When we come into the land, this is how we're going to govern ourselves. And so we're going to go through these because it's important to understand these before we get to the book of the Judges. Otherwise, we will have no context to understand why the things are happening in the book of Judges as they are. Remember, time is the ultimate context, not only in the chronological gospels, but throughout the scripture. Without the context of time and knowing everything in its time-ordered sequence, there is no cause and effect. It's just a verse here and a verse there. That's why we're taking the time to set the standard so that when we get into the book of Judges, everything will make sense. And so now we're in verse 22. This is the commandment concerning burying an executed criminal before sunset. If a man has committed a sin worthy of death and to be put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree. And you shall in no wise, but you shall in any wise bury him that day. And then in parentheses, for he that is hanged is accursed of God. And then the end of parentheses, that your land be not defiled, which Jehovah your God gives you for an inheritance. So this is where we get that verse as it is written, cursed is he that is hanged on a tree. Now, the word tree is the word wood. And we dealt with this in another one of our series when we were in the book of the Revelation, and that it's simply wood. And the context and the culture determines what it means to be hanged on a tree. Now, if we were back in the 1860s, during and after the Civil War in America, we would know that the death penalty, was to be hanged by a 13-knotted hangman's noose by the neck until dead. That's what it meant to be hanged, or hanged on a tree, or hanged on a gallows. But the word gallows in the Bible is the same as the word tree. It's just simply the word wood, and you have to determine what that means, because in ancient Egypt and in ancient Persia, what they did when they hung someone, they impaled them. They impaled them on a sharpened wood instrument. We dealt with this in the making of the King's Bride in the book of Esther, which every one of you really need to get into study very thoroughly, because we go ahead in time to Roman times, and what did they do in Roman times? They hung people on a cross, which is a representation of the Babylonian Tau. It's the cross of Mithra. The same thing that had been on the battle standards of the Roman armies for more than 100 years before the birth of Yeshua. As a matter of fact, in the Jonah Code, I show you pictures where at Orange, France, at the Arc de Triomphe that was put there 100 years before Yeshua was born, On the battle standards and on the shields of the Roman army is the cross, because it's a cross of Mithra. And they nailed and tied people to the cross of Mithra as a sacrifice to their god. So it could be hanging around the neck, it could be impaling, it could be on a cross, it could be hanging someone on a tree by the neck as well. But no matter how they're hung, their bodies are to be off before sunset. And that is an ultimate degradation when someone is hung for public display for the death penalty. And then we go to Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 1 and following. We see that we are to care for our neighbors' endangered livestock as if they are our own. If a sheep or an ox has gone astray, we take care of it. We bring it in, we feed it water, and then we find the owner of it. We are not to steal it. We're not to hide it and pretend that it's ours. We're not to change the brands on it, okay? As they did in the old West in America. And then the next verse, in verse 5, no cross-dressing to feign the opposite gender. A woman's not to wear that pertains to a man, and a man is not to put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are an abomination to Yahovah, your Elohim. And we see this very common today in the culture that it's came out of the perverse Canaanites, and the Sodomites are regularly doing this. This is an abomination, okay? Just like eating swine's flesh is an abomination. See, the Christian world wants to choose the abominations they want and ignore what the Almighty calls an abomination. This is an abomination. Now, verses 6 and 7, we are not to eat both the dam or the adult bird and the young of the bird. You can eat one or the other, but you don't eat them both at the same time. And it says that you are going to do this so that it may be well with you, that you may prolong your days. And so, really, the Almighty is the ultimate Greenpeace. He has told us, to be restrictive in what we do and how we harvest even animals for eating. And then we have building codes in verse 8. It tells us to construct a railing for our porch, a battlement on the top of the house. Nowadays in America, if your deck is above 24 inches tall, then you must have a railing of a certain height. These are all done in codes so that people are not injured. Well, the first building codes that we see are right here in the scriptures. Then it tells us something that can't seem to get through Congress's brain or all of the pharmaceutical corporations: no genetically modified or hybridized seed. Verse 9, you shall not sow your vineyard with diverse seeds, lest the fruit of the seed that you have sown in the fruit of the vineyard be defiled. And that is also, a genetic modification. Then you do not unequally yoke different animals together. You're not going to plow with an ox and ass together. They must both be able to pull their equal share. And this is brought forward into the Brit Hadashah to be not equally yoked together with unbelievers. Shaul was quoting it right here out of the Torah. So don't tell me that the Torah has been done away with. That's absolute nonsense. It's not been done away with. As a matter of fact, it is expanded so that we can understand the ramifications in other areas. Then we have the annulling of a false marriage contract in verses 13 through 21. And this is when a man takes a wife and he says that she was not a virgin. Well, if she says he's not a virgin, he hates her and wants to put her away, then it is the right and the duty, and this is what is done. The tokens of her virginity are brought forth by the father and mother, who keep the tokens of virginity, which is a white sheet that is used in the marriage bed to show that she was a virgin at the time because of the blood that would be on it. And so they bring that out to the judges, and if this man has said this against his wife, she wasn't a virgin, and they show the tokens of virginity, he may never, ever divorce this woman. He has lied. But If it turns out that she has lied and she's not a virgin, then she is stoned. So, because she has wrought folly in the land of Israel, and so this is how you keep whoredom out of Israel. Now, the nations are not prohibited from having prostitutes, but Israel is, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. Then we have verse 22, the death penalty for adultery. And I want to read this to you. If a man be found lying with a woman who is married to a husband, then both of them shall die. Both a man that lay with a woman and the woman, they'll both be put to death, so that you put away evil out of Israel. Now, we read in the 8th chapter of the Gospel of John where they bring a woman who is caught in the very act of adultery, but where's the man? Both of them are to be stoned. There is false weight and measures that we'll again be dealing with in the Torah, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander, as Miles Massey is known to say. So, the death penalty is for both of them. And verses 23 through 27, we have the death penalty for rape. Okay? Death penalty for rape. If there is a woman that is betrothed, and this is for a woman, a virgin that's betrothed to a husband, and this would be true of a young virgin who is actually, completely married to a husband and has been married. If a man finds her in the city and lies with her, and then you bring them both out and you stone with stones if she didn't cry out. Because in the city, someone's going to hear her. But if it happens out in the woods and no one could hear her, then you find out that she has been taken advantage by this man, and you are to kill him. Okay? Now, in verse 28, if a man finds a damsel that is a virgin, but she's not betrothed, and he lays hold on her and lies with her, and they're discovered, then that man that lay with her shall give the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, 50 pieces of silver, which is a high bride price, and she shall be his wife, and he may not put her away all of his days. That is it. There is no divorcing this woman. You will take care of her, and it doesn't matter how she is. No matter how intolerable she is, even though divorce is allowed, and we're going to get into that, under what conditions. Under this condition, you forget it. You laid with her, she's a virgin, you took her, that's all she wrote. Now, we have a good thing, this next one, interfamily activities forbidden. Verse 30, a man shall not take his father's wife, nor discover his father's skirt. Now, his father's skirt is literally kanaf, which is referred to as the wings of the garment. In other words, his father's covering, that man's covering is over that woman. You are not allowed to touch that woman. Even if your father divorces her, you're still not allowed to touch that woman, the son. And some people say, well, that commandment's been nailed to the cross, and so now you can have your father's wife. I don't think so, people. And then, in chapter 23, verse 1, we have those who are excluded from the congregation of Israel, including and the Ammonite and the Moabite, who are not allowed to enter the congregation under the 10th generation or forever. One is for the 10th generation, others are forever, and this is the Ammonite and Moabite, because when you came into the land, they did not provide you with bread and water, which you were willing to pay for, but instead they came to attack you, so they don't come in at all. They are completely outside and can never be a part of the house of Israel. And then we get into matters of military uncleanness and hygiene. Verse 9, when the host, the army, goes forth against your enemies, then you keep from every wicked thing. And so we've got a male issue that's dealt with verses 9 through 11 within the camp, and then verses 12 and following, You shall have a place also without the camp where you shall go forth abroad. Whenever you see the term go abroad, like this prophet, like Samuel and Saul went abroad, that means they went outside the city to relieve themselves, okay? So the army camp is to have a place where you go forth abroad, and this is basically a latrine. And it says, you shall have a paddle upon your weapon. It shall be that when you ease yourself abroad, you shall dig therewith and turn back the cover so that you cover up that which comes from you. Obvious what it's talking about. For Yahovah, your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and to give you up your enemies up before you. Therefore, sure your camp be holy, that he sees no unclean thing in you and steps in it and turns away. I added the word steps in it, but this is the picture. And this is what we do in the military today. The first thing we do when we set up camp, first of all, on the back of our pack, the very first thing is an entrenching tool. Okay, it's not only a combat device, number one, it's the paddle that's on the end of our spear or on our backpack, so we can dig a hole. The first thing we do is to dig a latrine. And if we're going to be there for a while, we're going to get a 50-gallon drum, and we're going to use that for a while, and then we're going to put kerosene in it, and we're going to strip off the C4 rounds from our 81 millimeter mortar shells, the extra ones, because that's what I did in the Marine Corps, is 81 millimeter mortar. So, to judge the distance and to determine the distance that you're going to fire that round, then you strip off packs of the C4, and we use that to burn the excrement that is in the cut-off 50-gallon barrels along with the diesel fuel. It is really an odoriferous thing, but it keeps the camp clean. And so if Yahovah walks among our camp, in the Marine Corps, he's not going to see anything like that. It comes right straight from the Bible. As a matter of fact, many of the generals in the Marine Corps were very studious, studious students of the Bible, because, this is how we learn how to conduct warfare. And then we have in verse 15, you are to provide refuge for an escaped slave. You're not to turn him back to the master. If the slave has escaped, you're to give him harbor, and you're not to turn him back, and you're not to oppress him. You're not to hold him hostage or ransom or make you pay to hide him. And then we have verse 17 and following, we have no whores, or sodomites in the congregations, okay? The congregation of Israel. Verse 17, it says that there shall be no whore of the daughters of Israel. That is one who is given to prostitution. It's not to be among the daughters in Israel. And we realize this, the whole situation with Judah and Tamar. Judah thought that he was hiring a prostitute, and when it was found that Tamar was actually pregnant, they brought her out as being a prostitute, and they were going to stone her, but it turned out that Tamar was really the prostitute that Judah had hired, but she did this whole thing because Judah had refused to give another one of his sons to her to raise up seed to her deceased husband. And so he said that Tamar was more righteous than he was. But because she was thought to be a prostitute among Israel, then she was to be stoned. Nor a sodomite. What is a sodomite? Obviously, it is a homosexual male. Men are not to be doing that to each other, all right? Let's put it that way. You shall not bring the hire of a whore, or the price of a dog in the house of Yahovah for any vow, for even these both are an abomination to Yahovah your Elohim. These are abominations. They don't change. And the clergy that is saying that homosexuality, being a sodomite, is okay with God. God loves, of course he loves homos. He loves everybody out there, okay? But he calls it an abomination. So if you're so inclined, you think you're born that way, well, guess what? You were born an adulterer too. You were born to have a relationship with just about every woman on the planet. That doesn't make it right. If she's married to someone else, You should be stoned. You should be killed for that thing. It used to be like permitted in America. Crimes of passion. A man finds his wife in bed with another man. If he kills him, well, tough luck there, sweetheart. Oh, yeah, I was just thinking, Ted Haggard. I mean, here's a Christian minister who, preached that, the Torah's nailed to the cross and we're under grace and all that. He hired a sodomite whore. A sodomite, a male who was a prostitute. I mean, if he just hired a prostitute, I may be a little bit easier on him. But no, I have to name him because he hired a sodomite whore. Then you shall not lend upon usury to your brother. It's talking about, to the stranger, to the person out there on the street, you can loan money and get money for it. And then vows to Yahovah. Verse 21, listen carefully, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to bring us right up into the Brit Hadashah. When you shall vow a vow to Yahovah your Elohim, do not slack to pay it, for he will surely require it of you. He is the one that is going to make judgment against you, and it will be a sin for you. And if you forbear to vow, it shall be no sin. If you don't make a vow, it's not a sin. But that which is gone out of your lips, you shall keep and perform, even as a freewill offering, according as you have vowed to Yahovah, which you have promised with your mouth. And we see that example throughout the prophets, that as Yahovah lives, in other words, as the Creator is alive, I will do this or I will do that. Yeshua never negated that. He said, do not swear by anything falsely. In the Hebrew Matthew, the word anything just happened not to have made it into the Greek text. Yeshua didn't say do not swear at all. He said do not swear falsely, the word falsely by anything. Okay, and then verse 24, the poor may eat a meal from the field. They're not allowed to take anything in anyone's field and put it in a vessel and carry it off, but they can eat in the field. And they can do it on any day of the week. The poor can eat in the field. Now we see Yeshua having to deal with this very thing, where they said his disciples were going through the field on the Sabbath day, and they had redefined this whole thing to where the poor couldn't eat on the Sabbath, because when they plucked the heads of grain, they said they were harvesting. When they rubbed it in their hands, and blowing off the chaff, they were winnowing. When they ate it and chewed it in their mouth, they were grinding. This is how the Pharisees redefined it so that the poor couldn't eat, and Yeshua said, nonsense. He taught his disciples, by example, ignore what the religious leaders have added to the Torah. It is non-binding, and that is what he actually did. Now, I have to calm down a minute. This is so exciting. I kind of raised my voice. I'm not yelling at you. I'm just excited about these things because, you see them right here in the beginning. You see them in violation in the book of Judges. You see them in violation in the Gospels and what Yeshua is dealing with. And then you see the application as Shaul picks up on these very things again. And as Peter said of Shaul, Paul, even as our beloved brother Shaul has written unto you many things hard to be understood, and those who are unstable and unlearned wrestle these things as they do the other scriptures to their own destruction. See, what are the scriptures that he's talking about? Is he talking about, he's talking about, the letters Shaul's written. They're difficult. They're hard to be understood because Shaul is an intellectual. He is constantly quoting the Torah and the prophets. He is commenting on the Torah and the prophets constantly. He's bringing them home as they live in today. And people that are unlearned in the Torah, they destroy these things and twist these things as they do the other scriptures to their own destruction. Well, we are going to see how these things all play out. Now, we come into rules for divorce. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1. When a man has taken a wife and has married her, and it comes to pass that he find no favor in his eyes, this is hen, which is unhen or unacceptable. no favor or something unacceptable in his eyes. And he has found, the word because is not even in the text, and he has found some uncleanness. The word uncleanness is the word nakedness, and it is also translated as improper behavior. There is some improper behavior in her. Then let him write her a bill of divorcement, give it to her hand, and send her out of his house. When she's departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. Okay? This is not called remarriage. This is when a woman is put out of the house, and it can be, a man has to initiate it, but it can be the same thing with a woman. She just can't live with this guy. He beats her, he tortures her. These things happen in real life, ladies and gentlemen. And when that happens, a woman is not bound to stay with a tyrant, with an absolute beast who beats her and tortures her and beats the children. If there's a situation like that, there is definitely improper behavior in anyone's book on that. No woman is expected to live through that. And it's only by bad church doctrine that people have lived in bondage. We've had the keys for 3,400 years, but because of absolute asinine, may I say asinine, because it's absolutely correct in usage, doctrine, dogmas that have come out of the Roman Church and then has stayed in and have never been challenged among the Protestants, that people have died in these kind of marriages. And so she can be another man's wife. And if the latter husband hates her and writes her a bill of divorcement and gives it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies, which took her to be his wife, her former husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife. There is no remarriage allowed. You cannot, if you put away your wife and she goes and becomes another man's wife, if he dies or divorces her, you are not allowed to remarry her. Remarriage is not allowed. Now, if you put away your wife and you marry her again, and she hasn't become another man's wife, that is permitted. And that happens many times, that, people separate, and it's like, we were hasty. She wasn't so bad. Her cooking wasn't that bad. He wasn't really that bad a guy after all, and so they can come back together at that point under those conditions. And then it says, for after that she is defiled. That's an abomination before Yehovah. You shall not cause the land to sin which Yehovah gives you for an inheritance. We're going to come back to this in just a moment, because there's a little bit more to deal with right here on this issue. But what we're going to do right now is take a break. Again, we are dealing with the instructions from the Almighty. I really don't care about what your particular denomination has taught you. I care about what the Almighty says. And it's time for you to open up your mind and open up your heart and listen to what the Almighty says, so that we can be on the same wavelength as He is, so that we don't find ourselves judged as it was in the days of the judges for being in violation of these things and making up rules and regulations that are forbidden to be made up by the Almighty. No one adds, no one subtracts. But the scripture does tell us, and we're going to see it several times as we go through here, do not muzzle the ox that treads out the grain. Take care of the Levites. We are getting the gospel message out to the world through these broadcasts, through all of our staff that are here. It's free of charge to the entire world. We're putting it out there. You have been blessed. Now it's your turn. Freely you have received. Now it's your turn to freely give. Freely give. We need some help. We want to stay in the air. We want to expand. We want to stay in the air first. I need you to take action now. And I'll leave you for these few moments. We are in the 24th chapter of Deuteronomy, Rules for Divorce, and this is something that is going to be coming up in the book of Judges. And as it says, when a man has taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes. The word is literally the negative of chen. It is unacceptable. There's something unacceptable in his eyes. He has found some uncleanness or improper behavior. It is also translated as nakedness, and nakedness is defined as improper sexual behavior in the section upon nakedness. When it talks about a person's nakedness, it is talking about this nakedness, like a man's nakedness, that's his wife. That nakedness belongs to him. Anything outside of that husband and wife relationship is improper sexual conduct, improper behavior, but it is not exclusive to that. In fact, these are the words that are used in Matthew about, that's been translated from Greek into fornication, that Yeshua talks about divorce. It was translated into the word fornication, but we have a problem because fornication is a legally defined term. But we have a problem in English because in the 50 states of America, or is it 57 states? 57 states, according to our fearless leader, Barack Obama. In the 57 states of the United States of America, it's legally defined in so many different ways. But yet in the Hebrew, it's an erva matter. It's a improper behavior. And this improper behavior we see laid out in the scripture. We see that even in the Persian Empire, that Vashti, who was the queen, even though the king had plenty of concubines, the queen, the prize queen, the most beautiful woman in the empire, she dishonored, she disrespected her husband, and because of that, Vashti was put out. And it had to be. All of the heads of state of 127 kingdoms round about said, what she has done cannot be allowed to stand, or there's going to be complete chaos. You let this women's liberation movement that just started in the court of Vashti at this big party, when the Women's Democratic National Convention got together and they all burned their bra. If you let this go on, there's going to be no stopping this thing. And so Ahasuerus put an end to it, and he found a woman that would respect and submit to him, and understood that when he said come, that meant she came. When he didn't hold out the scepter, she knew that she could die, but he loved that beautiful woman because she loved him, she respected him, and he always held out the golden scepter to his wife Hadassah, or Esther. We read about this, I was looking at this in Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 26. I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets. Whose heart, what in the deepest recesses, what she's always trying to do is to trap, is to snare, to find fault, to pick on, to belittle, to disrespect and to shame her husband. This is the preacher, Solomon, the wisest man in the world up to the time of Yeshua, said that I find it more bitter than death to be married to a woman whose heart is nothing but snares and nets, and whose hands are shackles. Whoso pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner is going to be taken by her. This is why Yeshua said that divorce is given for hardness of heart. And when you have a woman or a man whose heart is evil, that it's always beating down, and in the case of a man actually beating his wife, then I would say the same thing is true. Blessed is the man. Whoso pleases God shall escape from that kind of torture and abuse. Same as with a man. If you've got a woman that is like that, it is more bitter than death. I was reminding a psychiatrist, a doctor that worked for me many years ago, and he was talking about his wife, and I said, I can't relate to this. And he said, the reason being is that you have a good marriage. If you had a bad marriage, what you're thinking all the time, you wake up in the middle of the night and you're thinking of ways to kill this woman. And I couldn't relate to it, but yet he did. And he was a serious person. He was a counselor, he was a psychiatrist, and he had gone through that in his life and was trying to help me understand that, sometimes things are like that, but he at that time was married to a wonderful woman and it was a whole different thing. So, whosoever pleases God shall escape from her. We look at Proverbs chapter 12, verse 4, another one of these beautiful verses, where a virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. But she that makes a shame, or shames, or disrespects her husband is as rottenness to his bones. Literally, causes joint disease, rottenness to his bones, the woman who always shames and disrespects her husband. And so the scripture, under those conditions, says, this is why divorce is given, and this is what Yeshua says for the same thing. But, of course, the Pharisees said, and it is well known in the days of Yeshua that if you find a woman more beautiful than your current wife, you can divorce your wife and marry the more beautiful woman. Yeshua says, no, that's adultery. If you look at another woman to lust after her, you've already committed adultery in your heart. Forget it. You can't do that. And then it was also taught that if your wife burns a meal, you can divorce her. Wait, over an open fire, on a upside down wok on a side, you're going to burn just about every single meal. It's not that easy. No, there's got to be real grounds. This is what Yeshua is talking about. It's not just, you find a woman more beautiful. It may take about 30, 40 years, but, eventually, as I say, when the new batch of 23-year-olds come out, your 60-year-old wife probably isn't as gorgeous as she was when you married her. Certainly, you can find a more beautiful woman. Does Yeshua let that go? No, absolutely not. Well, let's continue on. In verse 5, we're in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 5. When a man's taken a new wife, he is not to go out to war or charged with any business. He is to be free at home for an entire year to cheer up his wife, make her happy. To make her happy, then you get out there back in the battle, okay? And then it talks about not taking a man's livelihood, his millstone, to pledge. And of course, a millstone is representative of his way of life. You don't take a pledge from someone that then will cause them not to be able to make a living. And this is, of course, what bankers are doing nowadays. They come in and whack and take your ability to pay the loan back. And this is how they basically rape the entire farming industry and, basically causing the Dust Bowl in America. And keeping that going on. Now, verse 7, kidnapping and human trafficking, it's the death penalty. And of course, Jesus nailed this to the cross, and so you can kidnap people, you can steal them, and you can sell them as sex slaves now, according to the modern Christian church. I'm going to read verse 7 and see if we find a way out. If a man be found stealing any of his brethren of the children of Israel and makes merchandise of him or sells them, then that thief shall die, and that's how you're going to put away evil. Ladies and gentlemen, murdering is forbidden, but some people need to be killed. Some people need to die. Those who traffic, human trafficking, kidnappers, they need to be shot on sight, okay? Let God sort them out, but, all these, and this is what the Muslim nations were doing. They were kidnapping Americans. They were kidnapping people all over Europe, the Barbary pirates, these Muslims, and the European nations were paying millions of dollars a year. Teddy Roosevelt sent the Marines over to the shores of Tripoli and kicked the Muslims' behinds and said, no, we are going to, we're going to rescue Mrs. Petticaris and the rest of these people that have been caught slaves by the Barbary pirates. And he said, this isn't the last time we're going to have to deal with these human traffickers. And they still do it today, ladies and gentlemen, because they have no respect for human life whatsoever. They will kill their own daughters because they don't marry someone, or they marry someone who they're not approved by their own people. I mean, read the Quran, the Holy Quran, President Obama. You see that human trafficking is just fine. You're in the wrong country. Go bow down to some sheik and, run your own desert whorehouse out there. Okay, here we go. Issues of leprosy we deal with, and we're not going to get into all that at this particular point in time, even though we do see the provisions for this in the Brit Hadashah, in the Gospels that Yeshua deals with. We have an issue concerning security deposits and how they're to be handled in verse 10 through 13. And then we pay the poor each day. If it's hand to mouth, we pay the poor each day. We don't hold them hostage to work for us. And this is common in the land of Israel today. They hold foreign workers hostage. They take their passports from them. They steal from them. I mean, it's a travesty what's going on in the land of Israel today with foreign workers, and also human trafficking in the land of Israel. Government officials being involved in houses, not houses of prostitution. Well, they are houses of prostitution because they have to pay, but these girls are brought in from other countries and they are actually sold into human bondage in the land of Israel. If you come on my tour, no, I'm not going to take you by, but I can show you the exact house where it was done until it was closed down a few years ago. And if I could show you them in America, then we'd send somebody out there to arrest everyone or shoot them on sight, which is what I think ought to be done with those people. And then we have fathers not to be put to death for the children, children for the parents. No, everyone pays the death penalty for their own sin. Verses 17, you're not to pervert the judgment of the stranger or the fatherless, take a widow's raiment to pledge. But you'll remember that you are a bondman in Egypt. So Yeshua is literally saying, Moses is saying, be a giver, be kind. Remember where you came from and help the people that need help. Yeshua is going to reiterate this over and over and over again. Verse 19 following, liberality. Don't harvest things so cleanly that the people around you can't help themselves to some of the things around you. Today, we don't have the same kind of fields and all, and harvesting and gleaning isn't done the same way, but be a giver. Be a giver. This is what the Torah teaches us. Don't try to glean it all and have it all for yourself. Make sure that what you have, that you share with those who are less fortunate. And that way, the government won't come in there and take it all from you so that they can redistribute it after they line their pockets. That's what's going on. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 1. 40 stripes maximum. Someone's going to be beaten, 40 stripes maximum. Verse 4, don't muzzle the ox that treads out the corn. Of course, this is reiterated by Shaul, and he makes another application to it, not animals, but talks about to take care of those who minister to you. If they're ministering to you in spiritual things, then is it wrong that you minister to them in carnal, or the things that someone needs in order to eat and to support themselves and to support the work of ministering to you? No, it is axiomatic. It all works together. Then we have verses 5 and following, which we find out that plays out in the book of Ruth. If brethren dwell together and one of them die, and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry outside to a stranger, but he'll take one of the brothers, the kinsman redeemer, so to speak, to be able to raise up seed to her offspring. Now, the seed that is raised up is not given his name, but it is recognized that it's from the wife of that person. And we see that this is what happens with the son of Naomi and her husband, Abimelech, I believe it is. And they have a son named Mahlon, which means sick, and he up and died. His wife Ruth then came into the promised land, wanting the people of Naomi to be her people and the God of Naomi to be her God. And it came into the land, and there was someone who had the right to marry her and raise up seed. And it tells us, verse 8, the elders of the city shall speak to him that has the right and the responsibility to raise up seed to this deceased person through his widow. And if he refuses to take her, verse 9, then shall the brother's wife come to him in the presence of the elders, take his shoe off his foot, spit in his face, and shall say, so it shall be done to the man who refuses to build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him that has his shoe loose. And this is exactly what happens to Boaz's brother, who refuses, doesn't want his inheritance marred by raising up and bringing up another child who will be the firstborn of Ruth, and doesn't want his inheritance going over there. So no, instead he says, I'm not going to do it. So what happens? His shoe is taken off, and whether she spits in his face, we don't have the detail on that. But then Boaz says, okay, I'll take her. And so we go on from there. And then at verse 11, hopefully this doesn't happen, two men are fighting, and a woman is not allowed to come up and kick another man, grab this man by the privates in order to rescue her husband. Let him have a fair fight, and the woman is to have her hand cut off if she gets involved and grabs him by the secrets. It says privates, secrets. We like both of those words. And then verse 13, we have the Bureau of Standards. You're not to have a bag of diverse weights, great and small. And of course, the standard is done in America. There's a Bureau of Standards in America. They come around and check and make sure that you're getting the amount of fuel that you're paying for. And every person is on the honor system when they go into the health food store, and there is the container of the organic walnuts and the non-organic, which is going to be half the price. Well, how is the person up front going to know which it is? Because all you have to do is take that bag and put the number down for the inorganic when you're buying the expensive stuff. And what is it? The scripture says, don't do it. Do not do it. For all that do such things and do so unrighteously are an abomination to Yehovah. So it doesn't matter whether you keep the Sabbath or not. If you go into the health food store and do that, you are an abomination to Yehovah. It's like the same word for a sodomite. You're a sodomite. You're a flaming sodomite. Sorry. And then we are to remember what Amalek did. He smote, in verse 17 and 18, he smote the hindmost of you, the ones that were feeble, when you were weak and weary and faint. When we were coming across the Red Sea, we got to the other side, and Amalek came and took out the women and the children. These cowards, see, this is what they still do in the land of Israel. Now, the United Nations renamed these people Palestinians. No such thing. They're Amalekites. They are the ones that use women and children as human shields. They're the ones that go in and blow up innocent women and children in shoe stores. Amalekites, he says, the Almighty says, I'm going to have war with them forever. Blot their remembrance out. Kill them. Every last filthy, stinking one of these cowards. They are not fit to live on the human on the planet. They are unfit to live in the world. Kill them all, let God sort them out at the end. And these are the people that Israel's having to deal with. Don't forgive them, it says. Don't forgive them. You're not to forget what they did. And because King Shaul did not take out Agag, the king of the Amalekites, then we see that Haman, the Agagite from the lineage of this Amalekite king, then tries to wipe out all Israel, and we see the same thing going on to this very day. And then it says in chapter 26, verse 1 and following, when you are come into the land that Yehovah your God gives you for an inheritance to possess it, then you're to take the first of all the fruit of the earth, and you are to bring that as an offering in a basket. And you shall go to the place that Yehovah shall choose to put his name there. And you shall go to the priest in those days, and you shall say to him, I profess this day to Yehovah, my Elohim, that I have come to the country that Yehovah swore to our fathers to give it. And it says that you are to speak this very thing to the priest as you offer the first fruits. And this is something that still today, this is something that we do not only in the land of Israel, but when we are at the time of Passover. This is what we do also at the time of Passover, which we offered the first fruits and we repeated this very prayer. And what we're going to do is we're going to break from this because I want to come back to this, because this again is something that we find in the book of the Judges was not being done, was not remembered. And because of that, because of all these things that we were told to remember, write them on the doorpost of our hearts, repeat them to our children as we walk by the way, when we wake up in the morning, as we go to sleep at night, to remind our children and to teach these things over and over and over again. But yet, in the entire Christian world, all of these are forgotten. It's like they don't exist. And that is why we have lost the golden key to prosperity. The golden key to prosperity is in our obedience to do what the Almighty said. And in that prosperity, then we return a portion of that, and the first fruits go to Him and to the things that He said to do. I'd like to pray. Yehovah bless you and keep you. Yehovah make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of Yeshua, the Prince of Peace. Amen and amen. Shabbat shalom to our fans. Shavua tov.